My mom slept with my best friend. But what I discovered after shocked me even more. Hey Reddit. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. It still doesn't feel real. If you had told me a year ago that my mom and my best friend would betray me like this, I would have laughed in your face. But now? Now I don't even know what to think. It all started a few months ago when my best friend, Jake, started coming around my house more often than usual. We had been inseparable since middle school, and my mom had always liked him. She saw him as a second son, and he was comfortable around her, maybe too comfortable. But I never thought anything of it. Why would I? Jake was my best friend, and my mom was, well, my mom. The idea of them together never even crossed my mind. At first, I just noticed small things. He'd linger a little longer after I left the room, or he'd make little comments about how cool my mom was. He even started joking about how he wished his own mom was as laid back as mine. I shrugged it off. It wasn't weird for Jake to get along with my mom. She was young for her age, always cracking jokes and keeping up with trends. That's just how she was. But then, things started getting strange. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to hear whispers downstairs, and when I'd go check, I'd find them sitting too close on the couch, talking in hushed voices. When I walked in, they'd both stop talking abruptly, exchanging quick glances before my mom would say something casual, like they had just been discussing the weather. Then there was the time I caught them in the kitchen. It was late, maybe around midnight. I had gotten up for a glass of water when I saw them standing there, too close, whispering. My mom had her hand on his arm, and he was looking at her in a way I'd never seen before. When they noticed me, they jumped apart so fast it was almost comical. Jake laughed awkwardly, saying he was just getting a snack before heading home. My mom played it off too, but something felt off. Still, I didn't want to believe it. Maybe I was just overthinking. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then, I found the messages. Jake had left his phone at my place one night, and I had picked it up to see if I could call his number to find it. But as soon as I tapped the screen, the notifications popped up. Texts from my mom. At first, they seemed innocent. Stuff like "Did you get home safe? And hope you're doing okay." But then I scrolled up. And my stomach dropped. Messages that made my blood run cold. Things like "Last night was amazing and I can't stop thinking about you." Messages that weren't meant for a mother to be sending her son's best friend. My hands started shaking. My head was spinning. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But the proof was right in front of me. I wanted to scream, to throw his phone across the room, to wake them both up and demand answers. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the screen, rereading the messages over and over again, hoping I was somehow misunderstanding. I wasn't. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? Confront them? Pretend I didn't know? I felt sick just thinking about it. The next morning, Jake showed up like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't been sleeping with my mom behind my back. I watched him carefully, studying his face, his body language, looking for any sign of guilt. But he acted normal. Too normal. That's when I realized just how deep this went. This wasn't just some mistake, some drunken accident. This had been going on for a while. And that's when I decided I needed proof. I started watching them closely, noticing every little thing. The way she laughed at his jokes a little too hard. The way he avoided my eyes when she was in the room. The way they'd suddenly go quiet whenever I walked in. It was all so obvious now. I just hadn't wanted to see it before. I needed more than just texts, though. I needed undeniable proof, something they couldn't talk their way out of. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I set up a hidden camera in the living room. And what I saw the next day shattered what little hope I had left. I don't know what hurt more, seeing them together like that, or the way they acted like nothing was wrong when they were around me. Like I was the idiot in the room, completely oblivious to the biggest betrayal of my life. I wanted to confront them right then and there, to scream at them, to demand answers. But instead, I did something I never expected. I stayed quiet. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see how far they'd go. Maybe I wanted to see if they'd ever tell me the truth. Or maybe, deep down, I just wasn't ready to face it yet. So I waited. And the more I watched, the more I realized something even worse. This wasn't just some fling. This wasn't just a mistake. They had real feelings for each other. And that? That was the hardest part to accept. But then, just when I thought I had seen the worst of it, something happened that changed everything. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew. And that's when I realized. I hadn't even uncovered the worst part yet. Update. I don't know why I didn't confront them immediately. Maybe I wanted to see how long they would keep lying to me. Maybe I wanted them to confess on their own. But days turned into weeks, and neither of them said a word. My mom still acted like my mom. Jake still acted like my best friend. And I was stuck in this nightmare, watching them, knowing everything, but pretending I knew nothing. But then, something happened that forced my hand. I was in the kitchen when I overheard my mom on the phone. At first, I wasn't paying attention, but then I heard Jake's name. My stomach clenched, and I went still, straining to listen. She was laughing, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. And then she said something that made my blood freeze. She said she loved him. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. I had suspected they had feelings for each other, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. I gripped the counter, my mind racing. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just some twisted mistake. My mom was in love with my best friend. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the room, and she nearly dropped her phone when she saw me. Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew. She knew I had hurt her. I didn't even have to say anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. And then, in the quietest voice, she whispered my name. I lost it. I demanded to know how long this had been going on, how she could do this to me, how she could look me in the eye every single day and pretend nothing was wrong. She tried to calm me down, to tell me it wasn't what I thought, but I wasn't buying it. I told her I had seen the texts. I had seen them together. I knew everything. And that's when she broke. She started crying, apologizing over and over again. She swore she never meant for this to happen, that it just happened. But that wasn't good enough. That would never be good enough. She begged me not to tell my dad, not to ruin our family. But how could I keep this secret? How could I pretend like everything was okay when my own mother had betrayed me in the worst way possible? And then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, Jake walked in. He took one look at my face and knew. The color drained from his skin. He tried to say something, but I didn't let him. I told him to get out. I told him we were done, that I never wanted to see him again. He tried to explain, but I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. He had been my best friend for years. He knew how much my family meant to me. And yet, he had done this anyway. But then, just as I thought he would leave, he did something I never expected. He told me he loved her too. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My best friend, the person I had trusted more than anyone, was standing in front of me, telling me that he loved my mother. I couldn't take it. I left the house without another word, my mind spinning. I needed to get away. I needed to think. But no matter how far I ran, the truth followed me. And that was just the beginning. Another update. I stayed with a friend that night, ignoring all the calls and messages from my mom and Jake. I wasn't ready to deal with them. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The next day, I went back home, and what I walked into was something I never expected. My dad was sitting in the living room, his face pale, his hands clenched into fists. And my mom? She was crying. She had told him. The moment I stepped inside, my dad looked at me, and I could see the pain in his eyes. He didn't even need to ask if it was true. He just knew. My mom kept saying she never wanted to hurt him, that it wasn't supposed to be this way, but none of it mattered. The damage was already done. My dad didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just stood up, looked at my mom one last time, and walked out the door. And just like that, my family fell apart. Jake tried to talk to me later that night. He sent me a long message, saying he never wanted to hurt me, that he hoped one day I could forgive him. But how do you forgive something like this? How do you look past the kind of betrayal that destroys everything you thought you knew? The worst part? My mom didn't seem to regret it. She was devastated about losing my dad, but when it came to Jake, she didn't back down. She told me she loved him, that she wasn't going to end things just because it hurt me. That was the moment I realized I had truly lost her. And then, just when I thought things couldn't possibly get any worse, something happened that changed everything again. Jake and my mom weren't just a fling. They had been planning something. Something big. And when I found out what it was, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Final update. I thought the worst was over. I thought I had seen the full extent of their betrayal. But I was wrong. A week after everything came out, I overheard a conversation that shattered whatever was left of my trust. My mom and Jake weren't just sneaking around behind my back. They had been planning a future together. My mom had already talked to a lawyer. She was planning to divorce my dad. And Jake? He was moving in with her. I felt like I was going to be sick. They weren't just sorry for what they did. They weren't just regretting getting caught. They were actually going to start a life together. My best friend was about to become my stepfather. That was my breaking point. I confronted my mom, asking her if this was true, and she didn't even try to deny it. She said she loved Jake, that she had been unhappy for years, that she finally felt alive again. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she had become a completely different person. The mother I knew was gone. I packed my bags that night. I told her I was done. I told her I wanted nothing to do with her or Jake. I moved in with my dad, who was just as broken as I was. He didn't talk much about it, but I could see the pain in his eyes. As for Jake, I haven't spoken to him since. I blocked his number, deleted every picture we ever took together, erased every memory I could. He was dead to me. My mom still tries to reach out. She sends messages, asking if we can talk. But I have nothing left to say to her. She made her choice. And I made mine. Some betrayals can never be forgiven. And this? This was one of them.